Have you heard of this awesome free social media app called RWBY Amino? Well, now you have. Amino is the home for any and all communities you'd ever want to take part in. But we're here to talk about RWBY Amino. If you're a fan of RWBY and want to engage more with its community, well, this is the perfect place to start. If you want to chat about the show or a certain topic, then take part in some public chats. Or if you're like me and can't draw, then admire those who can or share your own awesome fan art. You think you know the show well enough? Test your hand at the quizzes they've got. I get 100% all of the time. Just trust me on that statement. It's super cool and engaging. To get started, go to the App Store and type in Amino and download it, or click the links in the description below. Once in, go to the search bar and type in RWBY to join the community. Also, you gotta make sure to follow me, EruptionFang. You never know what may pop up. RWBY Amino. Welcome everybody, my name is EruptionFang and this is Volume 6, Episode 6, titled Alone in the Woods. Picking up from where last episode left off, everyone is getting settled. They have the food, water, a method of transportation. Now all that's left to do is wait out the storm. Maria takes it upon herself to do a little reading. She finds the diary of the man who ran the farm, named Bartleby, and so she tells everyone the history of how the farm came to be. With nothing else to do after a long day's work, our characters decide to fall asleep, resulting in the end of the series as no more main characters are alive. I'm kidding, of course, as all the main characters wake up the next day, only not freshly rejuvenated, but rather still tired. They fully intend on leaving the farm, but wouldn't you know it, Crow's bad luck strikes again. This gives the characters just enough time to get into trouble. Everyone begins to lose motivation to continue on with their journey, where Yang suggests just tossing the relic into the well. Because who needs a perfectly indestructible maiden door when you have a 30-foot hole? RWBY accidentally ends up dropping the lamp into the well, leading the characters having to go down to search for it. Convenient timing is convenient as Maria learns of the secret Bartleby was hiding. Something known as the Apathy lurks underneath Brunswick Farms, and so Maria has to go down to save them. They almost fall victim to the monster, but RWBY manages to use her silver eyes to push them back. Maria, who is colorblind, learns of RWBY's trait, telling her how to use them. It works and everyone rushes out of Brunswick Farm safe and unharmed. Yet another history lesson is given about Bartleby, and Maria reveals herself to have been a silver-eyed warrior. Now first I just want to say, I knew it! And second, for some I'm sure this reveal was as shocking as it needed to be, but for someone like myself it was exactly what I was expecting and also hoping for. The silver eyes have been a topic that had desperately needed some development on. While we may not have known about them until Volume 3, it was the first thing that Ozpin said to RWBY, and the fact that we've gotten to Volume 6 and still know absolutely nothing about them is quite ridiculous when you think about it. I mean, RWBY is our main character. We hardly know anything about her, her past, her powers, her parents, anything really. Once the trailer for this volume was released and I saw Maria's character, I immediately saw the opportunity she provided. And weirdly enough, it stemmed from my hatred of Ozpin. It was because I thought he was completely incapable of telling any sort of truth that I thought the show would do something like introduce a completely different character to help expand its lore. Ozpin could have been perfectly capable of telling us about the Silver Eyes and what they do, but it was just something about him that said he was never gonna do it. So Maria opens up a portion of the story's lore that needed exploring. I also love the fact that she has absolutely no ties to Ozpin. By that I mean, the only silver-eyed warriors we've known by name so far are RWBY and her mother. Both were guided by Ozpin. Their ability is so useful that it would seem crazy for Ozpin to not hunt them down and try recruiting them. But Maria's existence has just reaffirmed a hope of mine, which was other normal everyday people can be silver-eyed warriors. They could learn to use them and help the world without having to have fought for Ozpin's meaningless war. So then a question that might be asked is, what happened to her eyes? I've speculated on this before, but I might as well do it again as it's much more relevant now than it was then. First, Maria had silver eyes. By her own words, when RWBY asked her why she knew so much about it, she said,
I had silver eyes.
Meaning she doesn't anymore. Now, that might seem a bit obvious given her spectacles, but this once again just reaffirms my thoughts. But multiple theories can revolve around what truly happened to her eyes. First is that the silver-eyed powers were what destroyed her vision. This theory revolves around the idea that the silver eyes act as a double-edged sword. We saw what they could do in Volume 3 as well as this episode, but with it being such a powerful crutch to lean on, this theory makes it not as useful as it seems. By using its power, it's damaging her own eyes more and more to the point where she no longer has any. By doing this, the show would limit using Ruby's powers as a deus ex machina. Ruby would feel hesitant to use her powers, and doing so would harm herself in the process, waging whether or not the scenario therein demands it to be used. Another potential theory, which I would say is the most popular one, is that they were harvested. That's right, Maria Calavera, this sweet old lady's eyes were ripped out of her skull. With an old world filled with magic and gods destroyed, it gave birth to things like aura and semblances, and most interestingly, a power that is capable of wiping out creations of darkness like they were nothing. Such an ability is something that isn't so easily passed up. The likely culprit to who this would of course be Salem. The show hasn't exactly given us any other people to think it may be. Hell, even Hazel has said that they've dealt with silver-eyed warriors before, but dealt with implies more of a killing action. This could also explain Watts' role with Salem. To understand Silver Eyes, you'd likely want a scientist to explain it all as well as experiment with no morality issues holding you down. In all honesty, this theory is the most likely given the current information that we know. Then there was the big reveal about the farm, the mystery, the apathy. I got a lot of comments saying that this episode would fix a lot of the complaints that I had with the last one. While it did end up resolving a few of them, the core of what I was saying remained true. Do I like the Apathy Grimm? Hell yeah, these things are awesome. They've introduced a new type of Grimm that goes beyond just looks. Much like with Crow and his bad luck, these things just emit, well, apathy. Get into the vicinity of a pack and you're screwed. While I've still yet to find any of the Grimm remotely close to being actually scary, it's what they've brought to the table that interests me the most. But what I was talking about last episode with the mystery remains true. While the "I'm tired" lines I think are quite stupid and they quadrupled down on that this episode, the show threw us a red herring that was impossible to counteract. Crow's statement about everyone having died in their beds remains my biggest issue with the mystery aspect. That statement alone led the audience to believe that sleep was the main culprit. But when you learn that this episode that it isn't, then I'm left to question, why the hell did everyone die in their bed? We saw Team RWBY literally lose the will to live while they were down in the well. The apathy affects you no matter where you are, so Crow's statement about everyone having died in their beds was just a coincidence the audience was supposed to see past? Had people died in random locations around the farm, then perhaps we'd have thought that there was more than just a sleep monster about. So while the "I'm tired" lines I think of more cheesy now, this was a riddle that the writers didn't want the audience solving. And this leads to my last criticism with the episode. No one ever really thought. Not a single character did any sort of critical thinking upon arrival. They show up, find two dead people, learn that everyone's dead in their bed, and do nothing. There's no problem solving, no seeking for answers, they just go find food and go to sleep. You'd think that finding an entire farm where everyone died in their beds, someone would say, maybe we shouldn't go to sleep. It's the logical response and one the audience immediately thought of because we're capable of critical thinking. But if the show doesn't want the characters to see what's so clearly in front of them, then they never will. It should have been Occam's razor. The simplest solution tends to be the correct one. So the fact that none of the characters saw any potential danger, I can only say, undermines their intelligence. And this sort of leads into the way that they were acting. It's almost as if they were hypnotized. I know apathy is losing motivation and the will to live, but they never seemed fully on one side. Take for example the scene when they're all outside. Yang, much like Weiss previously, begins to express hopelessness in continuing on with their journey. She finds no need for it and that they should leave the relic here. But once RWBY drops the relic into the well, Yang says, we need to go. Go where? Atlas? You just expressed that this whole thing is bogus, but now you want to continue on with your journey? Like I said, it wasn't as though these characters were losing the will to live, it was as though they were hypnotized. Leave the relic behind and continue on with your journey. It was so jarring that I didn't even know if we were in reality or if this was a nightmare that RWBY was having. At the end of the episode, everyone seemed perfectly fine with heading to Atlas and continuing their mission, so Weiss and Yang aren't having second thoughts? It's honestly very confusing, but might I say a constant this volume has been providing us is Crow. I love what they keep doing with his character. I'll be honest, I've never been a big fan of Crow. Much like Neo, I thought he was a pretty overrated character for the longest time. Yeah, he was this cool, badass uncle who could fight and was really likable, but I never found myself caring too much about him. I honestly hated that everyone looked at him as a cool drunk. The show has consistently hinted that there's a reason for his drinking, but unless you actively seek out the details and watch videos like these, you've probably overlooked much of the subtext. But what this volume has been doing has been exactly what I've always wanted from Crow's character. Not some cool drunk dude who kicks ass, but someone who's emotionally broken and uses alcohol as a means to drown those feelings out. Every time I've seen Crow take a swig from his flask, it's always been in a semi-cool manner, but seeing him this episode drink those bottles was just sad. I feel bad seeing him this way, and it was actually the hardest thing to watch this whole episode and possibly the whole series. When Weiss was hit by her father, that was equally as hard to watch, but you know he meant to do it and felt nothing while doing so. Here, Crow is the one who's hitting himself. He's only got himself to blame, and it's because of this that Crow went from a character I never really cared about to my top 5 favorite characters. All of my favorite characters in this series are people who can be psychoanalyzed and offer much more than just basic character tropes. Crow is a character who has had absolutely zero issues this volume. This episode was really good, even through the characters being completely oblivious. I know a lot of people are saying how scary this episode is, and that's completely subjective. To RWBY standards, yes, this episode was definitely the creepiest one to date, but to any sort of actual horror standards, it was nothing special. It did a pretty good job with the atmosphere, but the scares were predictable. But from introducing a whole new type of Grimm problem to guiding Maria's character in a much needed path, this episode delivered more than it needed to. I'm excited for the immediate future regarding Maria, as well as the distant future and past with Crow's alcoholism.